I respect my peers who endorse the prescription mandate, and in fact I champion their motives for doing so. But I do believe it's misguided to believe that further restricting the purchase of pseudoephedrine by prescription would have the desired effect of lowering meth production. Now, my reasons for that are numerous, but I think I can summarize them and answer your question of what the electronic tracking system does for law enforcement right now. And that's what we would lose if this drug were to go to a prescription or controlled substance status. Electronic tracking blocks excessive sales, the 3.6 gram limit a day or the 9 grams in 30 days. At the point of sale, that's extremely important. That's on the front end of production. MethCheck in Kentucky documents approximately 10,000 grams a month that are blocked at the front end of the production process. That's 120,000 grams a year that would be converted into methamphetamine were those drugs not blocked at the point of sale. As far as I'm concerned, that's proactive law enforcement at its best. And that information that's compiled in the electronic tracking system database is real time to our officers. Our officers are able to get that information within seconds of the transaction being made or denied. Now compare that, if you would, with what would happen if this drug were to become a controlled substance or prescription. They then would be tracked by prescription monitoring system as opposed to electronic tracking. Now, arguably, Kentucky probably has the best one of those in the country. It's called the Casper system. But as good as it is, it still has its limitations. One of the biggest drawbacks that we have with it in law enforcement is that although our officers are able to access the database within a matter of a few minutes, the information is only updated in the database 7 to 10 days. So that information is usually 7 to 10 days after the fact that we get. Now, when you consider cooking methamphetamine in the relatively new one-step or shake-and-bake method is an hour and a half, that puts us considerably behind the 8 ball. I also fear, although I understand that in Senate bill that is being proposed, that we would remove the state and federal limits that are now in place, that 3.6 grams a day or the 9 grams in 30 days. Now, there's verbiage in the Senate bill that would restrict that from happening, but I fear that people would just go to a doctor, get a prescription, go to a pharmacy, get it filled, and just go to another doctor and another pharmacy and keep that up, again, with the limitations that I've already mentioned on the monitoring programs that are in existence. We wouldn't get that information for 7 to 10 days. So I'm very concerned that those limits that are now in place that have been phenomenally successful in limiting the availability of pseudoephedrine would effectively disappear. And while we're talking about those prescription monitoring programs, consider this. The MethCheck system that's in place now, any state in the country that implements the NPLEX system, the National Precursor Log Exchange, which incidentally is done at no cost to the local taxpayer, no cost to local government, no cost to law enforcement. It's paid for by the people that should be paying for it, and that's the pharmaceutical companies that make money off these drugs. That system talks state to state in real time. Again, a prescription monitoring program, which is not paid for by the pharmaceutical companies, is borne on the back of local taxpayers. Those systems are not compatible state to state, so we effectively lose our ability to communicate. And even if we could talk state to state, and we can't, HIPAA prerequisites would apply once that drug becomes a prescription drug, and so law enforcement would lose the ability to exchange this information, which would tremendously deter, as far as I'm concerned, our ability to effectively investigate, locate, dismantle, and prosecute the people responsible for production. And finally, let me just suggest this to you. How effective are prescription requirements in restricting access right now? The fastest segment of substance abuse in the country today, without question, is prescription drugs. We can't control our OxyContin, our Percocet, our Vicodin, our Loratabs. and we're going to prescriptionize another drug and expect the problem to go away. I just can't help but believe that that is a simplistic, perfect solution to a very complex problem that I just unfortunately don't think will work. We have investigators that utilize the meth check system daily. They log on to it, monitor it. There are bulletins that are sent in to us from the system that notifies if particular people are exceeding the limits. But we use it far more than that. Our officers with MDTs actually sometimes will do surveillance on particular individuals or particular locations. And if they see them go in to these pharmacies, they know before they walk out the door, literally, Dan, if they have purchased or attempt to purchase pseudoephedrine. Our officers have went to locations, lacked probable cause they need to obtain a search warrant, and by utilizing the meth check system and obtaining data off of that, have bolstered their probable cause sufficient enough in order to obtain search warrants to go in and dismantle these labs. There's a host of ways that the system can be utilized and is utilized, but in response to your question, absolutely, our officers use it daily. The 80 to 90%, and that is a very conservative figure, of the people that are cooking methamphetamine are users or addicted to the drug themselves. And if you consider the mentality of a methamphetamine addict, these people are going to do things to attempt to circumvent whatever we have in place. I certainly wouldn't argue that with anybody. And do they attempt to utilize these smurfers to circumvent the system? Absolutely, they do that. But I suggest to you, to believe the prescription mandate will work, what you have to believe is that individual whose life is totally consumed by this substance, methamphetamine, and whose life evolves around the next line of meth, you have to believe that that individual is going to say, the drug is now prescription, so I'm just going to quit. And that's just foolhardy. These people will do whatever they can to attempt to circumvent the prescription mandate, just as they're doing with the other drugs that I mentioned to you. As far as doctor shopping, scamming pharmacies, farming, all these things that they do now to obtain controlled substances and prescription drugs, they'll absolutely do with the prescription or with the PSC also. And my greatest fear is that in doing that, although again the reasons for doing so are noble, it's what we lose in our ability to track these individuals. Quite frankly, what I think will happen if the drug were to become prescriptionized, I think you will see a decline in methamphetamine lab statistics, not physical lab statistics, because law enforcement's ability to locate and track these individuals will be hampered considerably. And so what we'll be left with are people declaring victory over a problem that is still escalating out of control. Absolutely not, Dan. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. But I can tell you that I've been to Oregon. I've spoke with a number of those individuals there. And I think it's a mistake to compare the demographics of Kentucky with Oregon. The first thing that you have to understand is that a number of those states over there experienced a decline in methamphetamine labs without a prescription mandate. What Oregon has that Kentucky does not is that they are on a natural pipeline for the DTOs operating out of Mexico, bringing Mexican meth into Oregon. So those individuals don't have to cook meth anymore. There's still plenty of meth in Oregon. It's just not being produced locally. Now, but I'm not knocking what Oregon has done there. If that's worked for them, I'm tickled to death for them. The statistic that you mentioned on the 10% crime decrease, I spoke with the people about that also. And while some of that may be and probably is attributable to the methamphetamine situation, I think we would be in error to indicate that it's solely on that basis. You can even look to Mississippi, which many of my peers and I have also done. Mississippi, whose law prescription mandate took effect in July of last year, has saw a decline in those recent months. But again, anytime you pass a law like this, generally what happens is you'll see an immediate deterrent effect, regardless of what is passed. We saw that with the 3.6 to 9 grams. That is followed by a rebound increase, which is what we're experiencing in Kentucky today. So I think we have to be real careful at looking, particularly at Oregon, and saying what has worked over there is going to work here. There's something else here, too, that people don't like to talk about, but that certainly needs to be considered, is that one of the reasons, and certainly not the only reason, this is a complex issue, and there's a lot of reasons meth lab numbers are increasing in Kentucky. One of those reasons is just the manner in which it's being produced now. With the way we cook methamphetamine in Kentucky now is dramatically different to what was done a decade ago in this 10-step procedure. It's roughly now a very simplistic 1, 2, 3-step procedure called the shake and bake or the one-step, where more minute quantities of it are being reproduced in these very, very small labs. And so there's more of those and smaller amounts being made, so there's more of those being found to fuel these numbers. But another reason that those meth lab numbers have increased is because of law enforcement's ability to locate and prosecute these people, largely based upon the data that we obtain from the electronic tracking system. And when we're talking about undertaking an initiative that would pull the plug on that system, that's very concerning to me.